help of Bits and Tokens out of Miami. We have a very special guest today. His name is Eugene Leventhal. He works at CMU, went to CMU. He talks about blockchain, and we're going to learn all about him and what role the universities play in blockchain. So thank you, Jerome, for hosting us again.
Thank you for having me and welcome you guys. My name is Jerome. I'm from Bits and Tokens, a blockchain media company. I started Blockchain Universe, a virtual reality media company. And this space is mainly for just getting people together to talk about blockchain, to talk about virtual reality, gaming, all of the likes, AI, quantum computing, so many different things under the umbrella. I'm excited today to have a very intelligent man, Eugene Leventhal, on the line. We're going to have a great conversation. Welcome, Eugene. Tell us a little bit about how you got to CMU and in the blockchain space.
Sure, thanks, Jerome. So, and thank you for having me today. So, I right now I work at CMU, and my initial kind of entryway into getting here was as a master's student on the public policy side. But prior to getting here, I spent 7 years in the corporate world, mostly around the finance industry, most recently in consulting. And in 2016, I kind of went down the veritable rabbit hole with blockchain. Initially, not being as interested in the pure cryptocurrency side, but then when I started looking into some of the potential implications in terms of financial inclusion and in terms of the impact that it could theoretically have on banking the unbanked and the like, that got me really excited in it. And I actually came together with, I pulled together a team of folks and we worked on a project called EduDAO, where we were trying to create a DAO for schools and nonprofits to have a transparent and community-driven way to raise funds for necessary activities in their communities. And that was a great time. And it was also coinciding with me kind of wanting a transition and to step away from the corporate world. And so I applied to CMU and was fortunate enough to get into the master's program on the policy side, which is really, I consider it kind of more of an applied MBA in the sense of it's much more skills focused than it is about, sitting around and just reading about policy and writing policy memos. And while I was a student, I spent a lot of time on some student activities. One side of that was Heinz Radio and building out a podcasting portion, which is sort of half of my job at CMU now is running a podcast there. And the other half of my time was really spent building out the CMU Blockchain Club and starting to work with Scilab, which is now my other employer at CMU, and really trying to help with them or work with them and help them more formalize their research initiative and grow some of the community focused activities there. So yeah, after the 2 years in the master's, I graduated in May 19, and since then I've been a project manager at CMU.
Nice. I love to ask, what was the price of Bitcoin when you first saw it?
So the price of Bitcoin, I honestly immediately got more excited by Ethereum, so I can tell you that for sure. I think the price of Bitcoin was definitely under 1,000. I think it wasn't as cheap as something under 100, but it definitely was under 1,000 when I got in. But in early 2016, when I was getting very excited about the potential of DAOs and building this crowdfunding platform on top of a DAO, uh, Ethereum was around $15. So I definitely kicked myself a bit for waiting as much as I did to actually invest in some of these things. And not that I'm a big time investor now, but yeah, it's one of those things that you get excited by something but decide to not put your money where your mouth is and regret that a little later. But such is life.
I hear you on that. That has been my situation as well. I saw Bitcoin at 30 cents in 2011 while I was in college. And sadly, I didn't buy it then, and I regret it every day since. But, I got in when I got in, and I'm glad to have got into the Bitcoin and crypto space. Uh, I want to ask, what is your plan? Where do you see yourself going at CMU, and what are you doing there in the blockchain space?
Yeah, so in terms of what I'm doing here right now, as I mentioned, part of my role is with Scilab. That's the Security and Privacy Institute at Carnegie Mellon. It's not one of the official 7 colleges. It's meant to be more of a horizontal across all the schools for anyone doing security and privacy. So in my role as project manager there, and as being kind of the blockchain nerd on the partnership team, my role has very much been trying to grow our initiative, think of the different ways to connect researchers, supporting the CMU Blockchain Club, and thinking what kind of activities can they extend to, grow the amount of students actually partaking in it. When I was doing my master's degree, I had a chance to do my independent study focused more on blockchain regulation and legislation, and I had a chance to co-teach a blockchain course. So we'll see if that opportunity presents itself again. But in terms of where, from the standpoint of my current job, my interest is trying to I don't want to say formalize, because we do have formal activities, but I really want to grow the amount of activities that we have. And that includes, one thing I'm trying to work on this semester is potentially just doing a faculty and researcher only coffee time and just getting folks connected, because we have 35 to 40 different faculty members and researchers looking into different things blockchain, and a lot of them aren't aware of who's doing what. And as of right now, we have a number of courses going on. I think at this point total, between our Pittsburgh campus, our Kigali, Rwanda campus, and our Adelaide, Australia campus, I think we have a total of 8 or 9 courses being taught on blockchain. So we definitely have a lot of different individual activities happening. So part of what I'm interested in is just trying to connect the dots and bring people together as much as possible. But in terms of, thinking beyond just my current role, I am very interested in the next couple of years to go back to get my PhD looking at the human side of governance and distributed systems. I think that, and I don't know if we'll have time to touch on some of the governance things later, but I'm first of all, just talking to different startups and groups since 2016, there's obviously a lot of discussion on consensus mechanism. Ethereum's always been 6 months away from switching to proof of stake. There's a lot of clear technical issues that have existed in the industry and still exist. It's not as though all of those have been solved. But I think at the same time, there's been a lot more understanding and maturity around the fact that even, let's say, we wake up tomorrow and solve every technical problem somehow, that doesn't mean these systems are going to run as intended, because there's still a lot of change on the human side that needs to happen to truly adopt thinking, decision making, and gathering in a truly distributed manner. Because I think that is something that society in general has kind of pushed us towards more centralization for a variety of reasons, especially economic reasons, in recent decades and centuries. So I think stepping away from that mentality will need a lot more psychological, behavioral economic, sociological explorations of what does governance really mean as it relates to these systems. So yeah, those are kind of the 2 different threads of what I'm thinking right now.
Wow, that's a lot. I can't wait to talk more about governance. So let's break that down for people that are new to the space. Blockchain governance is. Can you describe that a bit for the
Sure. I mean, I think in general, so stepping away just from blockchain specific, I mean, governance is the idea, in my mind at least, it's the idea of how do we as a group of people who have a common goal in mind, how do we come together to clearly articulate that goal and create a set of policies so that we can continuously work towards achieving that goal, and in turn updating the policies themselves that are meant to help us achieve that goal. So, in the context of governments, and I would say that's probably one of the more studied areas of governance. It's, do we want the type of government system that we've seen in the U.S., democratic system that we've seen in the U.S. since the late 1700s, with legislative body, with having congressional components, with having the presidential leader? Do we want to follow more of a parliamentary system that's happening in the UK and other places around the world? That was obviously all stepping away from more monarchical systems, or I feel like in the last 60 years, it's been a lot of you're either democratic or you're communist socialist or you're authoritarian. And there's a lot of different ways of breaking that down. And especially once you get into the underlying theory, there's a lot more nuance than is usually happening in the public discourse. But I guess that's the case for most topics. then there's also a lot of the similar type of thinking in organizations, right? Is it good to have a very clear hierarchy where no matter what, you have to listen to your boss? Is it better to have a flat hierarchy where we're all effectively peers, regardless of how many years of experience you have and how kind of senior you are in the organization? And I think there's been a lot of interesting research on that side as well. And one of my personal areas of interest outside of blockchain and work is exploring drug policy and drug markets, and looking at decision making in very large organizations that are illicit actors, and how did they come to agreement on what to do. So I think these areas are ones that have had more exploration, and I know in terms of military structures, there's been interesting research done there too. But in terms of just say open source communities or blockchain type communities that don't always have a clear leader, that might not have clear financial incentive in terms of why people are doing this over ideological reasons. Why are people going to spend the time to do something that's more quote unquote direct democracy, which I feel like a lot of the mantra of a lot of blockchain governance systems will be more of, one person, one vote, and everyone will be involved and everyone will care. And then you see these systems get launched, and it's like, there's 20 to 40 people joining the governance call all the time. Is that really that different than having a C-suite and a board of directors? And how, if at the end of the day, the decision making around the systems gets centralized to under 20, 30, 40, 50 people, how different is it than the kind of centralized structures that we've had? And that's where it comes back to, in my mind, the psychology, the behavioral economics. How do we actually get people to care about things that can directly impact their well-being, in this very finite context of being involved in a blockchain system? But again, for me, and why I would want to explore that PhD as the impact of governance in distributed systems, is just because I personally see a lot of value in more community-focused distributed structures in general as we move forward in the next 40, 50, 100 years. So I think that, again, we're going to need a lot more good evidence-based understanding of how people come together, decide on a common goal, and create the policy around themselves to be able to continually work towards that goal.
Interesting. That's a lot, and I can see where it's going to incorporate a lot with blockchain, especially when you're talking about the duopoly. In the United States, we have basically a two-party system. I can see where blockchain will help to, one, allow us to vote on the blockchain, but also being able to allow us to do a lot more with our right to vote. Utilizing this technology, one vote per person, everybody could be able to verify their vote on the blockchain. So I think that's really interesting, and that governance is going to play a lot in the space for blockchain. One of the things that you brought up just now with governance and what would be great to change is a lot of our laws on drugs. And I saw that you do a podcast called Drug History?
The history of drugs in society, yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
How long have you been running this podcast, and what's the plans with this podcast? What's next?
So being both, I was born back in the Soviet Union when that was still around, and my family immigrated to the US, and I grew up in New York. So the idea of kind of corruption, mob, mafia, that was always just something that percolated in the back of my head in a variety of different forms. But as I've gotten older, and once I got to grad school, I just got very interested in both the history of how did the usage come about? Why are the trends that are present in certain areas the way that they are? And on the flip side, why are the approaches that policymakers taking the approaches that they're taking, especially given, the stat that's quoted frequently is we've spent $1 trillion on the war on drugs, and there's more drugs, more people using drugs, more people dying from drugs, more people in jail for drugs and not being rehabilitated in any meaningful way. The $1 trillion mark, yeah, there's debate and nuance into that, and even if you cut that in half, that's still a tremendous amount of money that has been spent without achieving its effective goal. And when you look at it on more of an international scale, things like Plan Colombia, some of the approaches that we've taken in Mexico, we end up you can argue unintentionally or intentionally, but the end result is that we end up supporting the kind of activity that we outright state is not in our best interest. You know, we don't want to increase the amount of turbulence that governments are experiencing. We don't want to increase the amount of crime, the amount of deaths, the amount of murders, the amount of drug trafficking, etc. And if at the end of the day, the end goal is so that less people die from substance abuse, you know, there's been a fair amount of research already showing that investing in education programs, investing in things to try to decrease the demand as opposed to decrease the supply, that they're much more effective. You get a lot more bang for your buck, you know, if you're going to look at it in the pure economic sense. So we as taxpayers, assuming we don't want our tax money wasted, and the end goal is to have safer communities with less people dying from drugs, we should be supporting more of a direct approach towards education and other alternatives towards individual and other support structures to individuals who end up going towards either life, you know, a life of crime, being on the distribution side or on the usage side. And just as someone who's experienced mental health issues their entire adult life, the question of addiction and our understanding of addiction has also been very fascinating to me. So the first season of the podcast is trying to explore the history of opium and how it went from, you know, just poppies being another plant that were part of the medicinal or, you know, just general trade and eventual medicinal trade into, you know, morphine, heroin, more recently fentanyl. Granted, that's not coming from the opium poppy, but it's, you know, it's hitting the same receivers in our brain. You know, how did this kind of evolution, and I've also been doing interviews with people ranging from, I think the most recent episode that was published as of this discussion was with a researcher in University College London, who she's of Italian background, and her entire focus has been on the 'Ndrangheta clan or mafia, if you want to call it as such. And that was when, you know, growing up in New York, it's like, oh, it's all the Sicilian mob. There's just so many misconceptions about how this, what we think the drug world is versus the reality of it. And yeah, I just find it fascinating. And again, coming back to the governance side, you know, a group like the 'Ndrangheta, there's no, you know, like the CEO of this organization. There's no, it's not like the more of what we think of the cartels in Mexico with El Chapo, or, you know, very specific individuals being at the head of a certain group. There, it's a much more clearly distributed structure, and it's much more decentralized. And, you know, people operate in their own domiciles, and they kind of have free reign over what they do as long as they don't impede on the activities of others. And granted, they've done a good job keeping things under wraps, so there isn't as much available research on it. But yeah, I love talking to folks like that who can really shed some light, given that that's where what they're focusing their career
on. Do you think that there's a possibility we'll one day have voting on the block, voting or not voting, but paying for like legal? I would say more marijuana than opium, but paying for that with like Bitcoin or Ethereum. How long do you think we reach that point legally?
So a couple of things there. One, in general, I think that supply chain still has some of its challenges with having, you know, pure transparent tracking of goods. So I guess if the question specifically is, you know, when will we as a country have recreational cannabis across the country? And, you know, a number of us are in Pennsylvania. You know, Governor Wolf, you could argue whether or not it's trying to rush through or not. I don't think it's going to happen regardless in the short term. But, you know, he said recently of like, oh, well, we should try to recreationalize cannabis right now so that we can help pay for COVID things. And in general, I am very pro legalization of all substances, including harder narcotics as well, you know, opioids, etc. And I'm very happy. I mean, that might be going off tangent already, but I am very happy to justify my views for any of those. But I think that the more pressing concern for me is making sure that in the, you know, if we just try to rush through, say, cannabis legalization in Pennsylvania, chances are it's going to not have a restorative justice component. It's not going to positively affect the communities that have been disproportionately negatively affected by the existing cannabis laws of the last 40, 50 years. And so, you know, if we rush to jump to like, ooh, yay, more tax revenue, and let's think of how to make it as accessible as possible, I'm worried that that might increase addiction, that might increase usage in negative ways, that might not help the communities where people have spent a time in jail and had their lives effectively ruined for the equivalent of, you know, what some folks in the communities that I grew up in that were slightly more privileged, that, you know, they got off with a slap on the wrist. And, you know, I know Illinois has put forth a very interesting bill where they have a very heavy restorative justice component to it. So I'm hesitant on guessing on when this happens, just because, and I don't mean to, you know, comment on our current politicians individually. I just think in general, the political climate of the last decade has been increasingly going towards less sanity and less useful discourse and just more polarization. And, you know, in that environment, I'm just worried about the good policies rolling out and us having consensus around them in general. But in a place like California, say, or I guess in California is still weird, but in Washington or in Colorado, I don't see why they wouldn't accept Bitcoin or Ethereum, especially consider as an individual dispensary that already has the ability to be public to sell recreationally, because chances are they still are facing banking issues. So it might actually be easier for them to have, you know, a cold wallet where, you know, they store and import all their money off to, and figure out ways to bring that back into more traditional US dollars if they need it, if and when they need it. But yeah, I would assume that there are at least a few. I actually don't know off the top of my head, but I would kind of be shocked if not a single dispensary in Washington or in Colorado accepts some kind of cryptocurrency.
Yeah. I know that there are people working on it, and shout out to Potcoin. I definitely think that that's going to be a possibility. I'm willing to throw a date on it and say 2030. I think that we're leaning more and more towards an understanding that people that are taking a lot of these drugs, they're not criminals. They might be going through something. Some people use it recreationally. It's more of the stigma that's causing a lot of the problems and getting people to get to the point where they overdose or you know, utilizing it for the wrong reasons. Whereas if we were to educate people more and help them, treat them, study it, I think that there's a lot that could be done. I look at a lot of the kids that have like epilepsy and all of these different neurological disorders, and having you know, concentrated marijuana in like a liquid form. You've seen them just drink it and then they're like normal, able to relax, no seizures, stuff like that. So I'm really interested in seeing where we go in that space. But let's bring it on back to the university and the college side. I love to bring in gaming. I want to know a little bit more about the campus life at CMU. How many people are on or were on campus that you notice are into, you know, blockchain trends, the gaming trends, you know, what's going on in the space and in college? It's been a little while since I've been in college.
Yeah, absolutely. I will just say, just to one holdover comment on the cannabis side, I just do think that on the one hand, I'm totally with what you're saying. I always just stress the caveat of addiction to a variety of substances, ranging on the intensity of the substance, is a real thing. And one of the reasons I think well thought out laws are important is because they can think of how to link health services and community building to the distribution of these substances, which can mitigate some of the negative outcomes. And again, if you add the restorative justice component of who's actually benefiting, making the money from these new businesses cropping up, then I think that it can be a net positive in society. But, you know, there is some research showing that there's an uptick in usage, and, you know, there can be a moral argument of, you know, would parents rather their kids be drinking or smoking weed? You know, that'll be different in different communities, and some will say, I'm sure they hope they're fully abstinent, and that's just not as realistic. But yeah, I just wanted to throw that caveat in there. In terms of the universities, well, I'll be honest, I am not as big on the gaming side, so I just don't have my pulse on that. I know that I'm pretty sure almost every person that I talk to, especially who's an undergrad in somehow interested in this space, has had some affiliation with or some penchant towards gaming. And I know that there are definitely some activities around that side. I don't know them that well off the top of my head. In terms of blockchain overall, I mean, so I came into grad school in late 2017 or summer 2017. So right before the the huge explosion of Bitcoin 20K and all the other things that were happening that year. So that, it was interesting to see doing community organizing that semester versus the subsequent two, because that semester we'd host a blockchain 101 and 80 people would show up, and there would be a ton of interest in these courses, in any public lectures that we did, in any community building. Whereas once the bubble burst, so to say, interest definitely waned. But I think it's, like, not to keep harping on Nicholas Kristen's course, but he was the first. So he was someone who was one of the first researchers, I'm quite sure the first researcher at CMU back in 2011 to 2013, starting to do research on Bitcoin and Silk Road. And he ended up launching a course within a few years, blockchain and cryptocurrencies. I'm getting the name of that right, but on that topic, that's a full semester course and is still, in my opinion, kind of the cornerstone blockchain course at Carnegie Mellon. I haven't asked him about last spring, but at least through last spring, he's always had a wait list for that course. I guess besides the first year or two where it was still kind of a niche thing, but especially come 2016 and especially 17, that course just exploded in popularity. And the first day, of course, there's people standing in the back just because there's not enough room for everyone, and they got to figure out who's actually going to take it and who isn't. So, I think it's encouraging to see that interest is happening in the form of actual longer form teaching, and not just like, hey, I'm here to day trade, or hey, teach me this thing so I can go make some money real quick. And that's encouraging to me, that people actually seem to be interested in learning the basics of it. And one of the MakerDAO founders, finished his undergrad at CMU and then immediately launched MakerDAO. And actually, this is public at this point, but like, he gave a very healthy donation to the School of Computer Science, which is his alma mater. And this semester we had Elaine Shih from Cornell join. So we're having more and more activity and formal activity happen. Right now there's projects on 2 different programming languages. There's one active project on looking at how to potentially use a blockchain-based credit alternative system to help with revitalization of some COVID-related economic issues. We have some folks looking from the pure economic side, looking from the anonymous market side, looking from proof of stake, security, and incentives, and kind of the link between those three. We have some folks looking purely from the cryptography side. So yeah, we have a bunch of different activity, and I always get very excited in seeing, we have the proper research happening. We have education courses happening, like I mentioned, the 8 or 9. And the community side is something that's really been expanding as well. We have the club is trying to figure out what's their hands-on project for the year. And despite the full, Zoom university environment, the club size has actually been growing, which is great. And yeah, I'm just really excited to see kind of how some of these activities will continue, and to see if there are any opportunities to build links between those different groups working on campus at CMU, but also thanks to organizations like BEN, the Blockchain Education Network, or BAF, which is, I think, Blockchain Acceleration Fund. These groups are trying to connect across a bunch of different universities. So I think it's exciting to see the kind of community activities that are coming up.
So much parts of that is such quality knowledge there. All right, so I brought up the blockchain and gaming on CMU because I would like to see some blockchain gaming events there. And if there's anything that I could do to help, let me know. I know you're the blockchain guy there, but do you know anything about blockchain gaming?
So, I mean, I was just listening to a podcast where was it Vitalik and someone else from the Ethereum Foundation were talking about the most recent game that came up in the last month or so in the Ethereum ecosystem, and they had to run it on testnet because the gas costs would have been too crazy for anyone to be able to play. I mean, again, as someone who's not a big gamer, I am just aware, I am trying trying to stay aware of why does blockchain make sense for an area like gaming.
I will.
And I know for something like, yeah, for like something like in-app purchases, and, you know, I'd be happy for you to educate me on my lack of knowledge here. But, you know, for, again, given my very limited understanding of gaming, in-app purchases are an absurd industry to me, and just the amount of money that they generate. So it makes sense that there should be transparency and more potential ease around that. In terms of potentially trying to store information from games on blockchain, I don't think I've heard anyone argue that should be happening, nor do I see the logic of that necessarily. Yeah, I'd be interested in kind of hearing from you in terms of what is the value add of blockchain for gaming, besides making it easier to have, say, your own currency with the game, or an in-app, or just a more transparent way to do in-app purchasing.
Okay, so why you would want to have blockchain in a game is because, all right, you brought up the first part of it, the financial aspect, like you said, in-app purchases. That's a big portion of it. However, you can also embed the blockchain into your assets. So I really love to use the example Fortnite. I'm sure you've heard of the game Fortnite. Fortnite has its own game or game in-game currency called V-Bucks. So V-Bucks could easily be a cryptocurrency if they tied it to a blockchain. And then with V-Bucks, you could be able to then buy the different assets like parachutes when you're dropping in on the island, skins for your guns and for your avatar, stuff like that could all be on the blockchain where I then own those assets. So for example, with Fortnite, if Epic, who runs Fortnite, shuts down Fortnite tomorrow, no more Fortnite, all of the money that people spend buying V-Bucks so that they could buy those in-game assets, it's gone. I don't own anything on Fortnite. Whereas with blockchain incorporated in the games, you own those assets, so you can pull it off the game. I can't pull anything off of Fortnite. I can't take that with me to another game, let's say Apex Legends. So being able to have blockchain incorporated into the assets allows you to be able to manage those items, you know, connect them with other games, share and trade them with other people, which brings its own economy within games. So there are a lot of games that are trying to test this and bring this technology to the space, making really cool games. The top game right now in this space, I'm glad to have met them before, they're at the top, is Splinterlands. We actually interviewed them last Monday on Crypto Mondays VR. Go check that live stream out with Annalise. They have a card game similar to, like, I would say Pokemon or the likes, but basically it's a bunch of monsters on a card. Each card is an NFT, and unlike most card games, you know, it's turn by turn, so you have to, you know, my turn then your turn, and it takes a long time to play the game. Whereas what I like about Splinterlands, it's more about building your deck. Build your deck, get as much really cool NFTs, trades with your friends, get a really cool deck, and then once you start the game and you matched up with someone, it's going to put your deck against their deck automatically, and whoever has the best deck per the rules of the game, and the rules change depending on which game you're in, so there could be so many different changes. It allows you to really test your limits or your abilities to pick good cards out of your deck of NFT based cards. So I think that's a really unique way of utilizing blockchain in a card game. I think it's really simple, and I think that Splinterlands is doing a great job with their game. So I'd definitely say check that one out. But there are a lot of other games that are not card games that really grab my attention. In 2 weeks, uh, Satoshi Games developer who's going to be talking about Light Night. If anybody hasn't checked out Light Night yet, that's similar to Fortnite, but when you kill people in Light Night, you earn Bitcoin, as well as when you die, you lose Bitcoin. So it's a lot of fun being able to run around and trade assets with people in games and across games. What do you think about that technology in gaming?
So again, I do not mean to offend any gaming fans here. I mean, in general, again, to me, this is just one of those where I'm like, how am I already an 80-year-old man on this topic? But I just don't get why the emotional value of in-game app purchasing. I understand the logic of it. I've read about the markets. I recently heard a podcast from Wild Tech about, I believe it was non-blockchain based attempts at, as well as some blockchain ones, attempts at being able to exchange in-game assets outside of the actual functioning of the game. So I get that this is a thing that exists. Hearing you speak just now, one thing that sounds exciting there would be trying to think of what is the breadth of creating a gaming universe, and especially if you think about, I know you mentioned you do a lot of stuff in VR as well. You know, thinking about literally creating a gaming universe where different individual games can appear and having these assets actually have longer term value. Because just in like the Fortnite example, I don't get what, I mean, I don't even know what the assets are in Fortnite, but whatever I buy in Fortnite, like, could I even use that anywhere else? And so what would be the point of that? But I guess hypothetically, if there is, say, your own little gaming universe, the closest that I'm coming to thinking of this is like, if you take the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and swap movies for games, you know, if you have something like this that is built in a single universe where new individual games can pop up and these assets can actually really have function beyond a single game, even if, like you mentioned, one of these disappears tomorrow, you readily have 10, 15, 20 other games where you could readily utilize that. That sounds cool. And I'm sure that some of the groups that you mentioned might already be working on this kind of stuff.
Exactly. You already know it.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Again, just as someone who doesn't get gaming, again, I don't want to sound old, but it's just like I don't totally get it. So I get that I don't get it in terms of like why people want this in the first place. So just like why you would need the NFT based cards, I would need a little more time trying to understand people's emotional attachments to these things and why they care about it to fully contextualize that for me. But in terms of that one instance of like build out a game universe and have interoperable components between them, that logically makes sense to me.
I'm glad that it makes sense. I get it. You're not a gamer. I'm hoping to be able to really, as a service, help people find what is the best blockchain game that suits you. You know, I'm more of a real-time strategy player. I love playing games like Rise of Empires, where, you know, or Clash of Clans, where, you know, you're building your base and you try to build it up as fast and strong as you can, and then you're going up against other people. But it can take a lot of time. It's a lot of really time consuming. So you know, there's a lot of console games that are out there. I play on the Xbox, PlayStation, all of the likes. I want to see more games like on the mainstream consoles that incorporate blockchain on the back end, but we're not there yet. So, you know, the space is primarily people building either web-based games. We're starting to see games that are popping up in the likes like Steam Store, that'll allow you to be able to basically have a dual interface. You have the game itself, which you install and download, but then you go to the website to be able to exchange your assets, or go to a third-party store like OpenSea, who we interviewed a little while ago. You're able to trade your assets on stores like OpenSea. I want to give you guys a little bit of a history in regards to this. Blockchain gaming really started around 2014. Hashcraft was one of the first games, and then a little after that, the largest game really got attention. I'm sure you heard of a game called CryptoKitties. So CryptoKitties is a collectible-based game where you're just basically collecting the kitties, but the kitties that you pair up together can then be able to mate and have their own kitties, and those kitties can have different configurations from their parent kitties, and it could mix the two and make a different kind of kitty that's either common or rare, and the more rare ones can cost a lot more money. So a lot of people see that collectible based strategy as a great way, if the games get a lot of attention, to then be able to garner a lot of financial resources to it. So the largest CryptoKitty purchase, if I'm not mistaken, was 140,000 US dollars for one CryptoKitty. So, you have some that are going to be really cheap, but then you have some that are going to be really expensive, and that's just real collectible. There's nothing that you really do game-wise. It's not fun unless you find it fun to collect kitties and merge them with other kitties. Cool. Not my cup of tea, but I'm glad to help that, educate people that are into that type of gaming style. Whereas, I brought up Splinterlands, where you're saying, I don't get the whole gaming cards, NFTs. Why would you want to do that, right? I'm sure you know that there are people that have like Pokemon cards to this day, and they love to trade those Pokemon cards. It's fun to play the game Pokemon and just interact with other people. So being able to have that interaction with other people in Splinterlands, as build a guild, which is like a community of gamers, and go up against other guilds, that community-based organization is what I think really pulls me into Splinterlands. And then because they're building a community around it, it makes it so that way their assets, those cards that they're you're able to trade, have more value towards them. And like I said, because of that strategy, Splinterlands has really gotten to the point where they're one of the top blockchain games on the market. So moving a little bit more from the previous and styles of blockchain gaming. Like I said, it's mainly web-based games as of right now, but we're starting to see the trend of more downloadable blockchain games and utilizing them in other platforms like virtual reality. So I'm sure you've probably heard of a platform called Somnium Space, maybe?
I've heard of it. I don't know much about it.
Okay. So right now I have a virtual world in a platform called AltSpace, which is made by Microsoft. And then Facebook just created their own competitor, which is in beta right now called Horizons. And going forward, you have other platforms that are trying to really compete, one of which is Somnium Space. And Somnium Space is making a virtual world, like you said, where I could be able to trade my assets across other people in the game, across other games. And one of the things that they allowed recently was crypto kitties that I was telling you about, to be able to take your crypto kitty and incorporate it, put it on Somnium Space and have it follow you around like Pikachu in Pokemon. So that digital 2D collective NFT that you can find on CryptoKitties website, you can then turn that into a 3D asset that can follow you around in virtual reality, and you can show off your collection. So just great ways to be able to incorporate this technology within gaming and making it so that way, what we were talking about, it's great to not just have people utilizing Bitcoin and blockchain for the finance and investing platform, but also as a platform for utilizing the currency, making it a utility that people want to be able to trade and incorporate into their game. So I really hope that more colleges, more people start to look towards onboarding people utilizing blockchain gaming, because for a lot of people, it's really, really hard to just get them into blockchain, get them to make a wallet, get them to understand the technology in the first place. But if you just get them to have some fun and then educate them that, hey, that asset that you're using is on the blockchain, you can then be able to trade it with other people utilizing other platforms or trade it with other games. I think that's what's going to pull in a lot of people, and that's what's really going to spark the momentum for blockchain and utilizing it as a utility. What do you?
I'm sorry. I kind of want to tie what you're saying back into a question to Eugene, because a couple years ago, I think it was about 2 years ago, I read an article about CMU creating their own coin. So it's called the CMU Coin. Did it ever come to fruition? Is it used on campus, or is it a learning tool? So that's why I'm wondering, talking about gaming, and you have like this actual coin that you can use. Can you take CMU Coin and go buy a hamburger with it, or like what was the purpose of that experiment?
So I have not been directly involved in it, and I am not 100% sure what is public about that or not. What I would feel comfortable saying is that the initial intention was to explore what it could be used for. And no, you can't go buy stuff on campus with it. I think that's the extent of what I would feel comfortable saying, given that I don't have direct involvement and I'm not sure where things stand exactly with that project.
but it's basically a tool to teach people more or less about blockchain, or
I think that was definitely the intention. Again, as someone who I have not talked to that team in some time, and I haven't caught up on the specifics of how they're utilizing it. I think one thing that I can mention is that in conjunction with a university partner, there was a course run to help try to think of what would useful use cases be around it. But yeah, I am not 100% sure where things actually stand, so I don't want to accidentally put my foot in my mouth and say they're doing something they aren't.
It's interesting. At least it's still a project that's alive. It's not something that was just a fly-by-night kind of gimmicky thing for the school. I'd like to find out in the future what actually comes of it. So
same here. I'm glad you asked that question, and
same here.
I really hope that we can learn more about it and see if there may be a way that we can utilize that coin in blockchain gaming and get more people on campus to just play and have some fun, and then from that learn more about blockchain. I see that, guys, if you guys want to join the Zoom, you're watching on YouTube, Twitter, Periscope, all the likes, you guys can join us in the Zoom call. I dropped the link down below. Actually, I dropped it on the YouTube. I will also drop it across all platforms. Come on, join us on the Zoom call and come ask your question. So whoever has an iPhone, go ahead, drop your question, please.
Hi, can you hear me? This is Laura.
Yes.
Hi, Laura. Yeah.
Hey, Eugene, I just want to say I'm one of the organizers as well. Thanks so much for coming on. And I'm really fascinated about the work you're doing with creating those physical communities through CMU. Do you all have plans on how to kind of like break out of the academic bubble and kind of educate the general community? Do you have anything in the works for that?
So do we have anything officially in the works for that? No. So I think that this is in general where universities can struggle. I don't want to pretend that this is just a CMU problem, though I do wish that we would be doing more of it. I think that, if anyone's come across the blockchain course on Coursera that the Princeton team outsourced, they decided to open source their content, which I don't have that textbook in here, but they released a textbook, one of the first official textbooks around blockchain, and they released a course around blockchain. So I think they had a larger specific intention as to why they were doing that. At the end of the day, there's always the challenge of, if you're opening something to a wider audience, you might not want to immediately assume that they're, CMU CS undergrads. And if that's the case, then who is spending the time to build that out and why? I know when I just got here back in 2017 and before Blockchain in the Berg started organizing, and I know Cody, so yeah, it's a jump off, but I'm forgetting his exact meetup's name, but he's doing an Ethereum meetup here in the city. I know there's been a Bitcoin meetup since forever, meeting once a month at Roland's, and there have been a few, but I did try to organize a meetup group that was more focused on, blockchain 101. Let's go over the basics. What is the technology? And just personally, and this could just be my own, me not being a natural born digital marketer, I struggled to get the kind of attendance that made it seem meaningful and worthwhile. And granted, we didn't capture all the content, which would have made a lot more sense. So I think there are just a variety of issues that can exist around that. To directly answer the question of, is someone currently planning this? No. If there is a platform and medium where there is a large interest in getting that kind of basic introductory education in the city, I think I can get a few people together who would be happy to help organize and run some of those things. As mentioned, I had a chance to co-teach a course, and especially, applying this knowledge for non-technical people. I think that that's something where I've always enjoyed doing, but yeah, as of right now, there is no specific plan to roll it out to the city, wider to the city.
Okay, thanks so much. Yeah, it's definitely it's not easy. Maybe we'll all just link up and make Pittsburgh great again. So, thanks, Eugene.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
I like that one. And if anybody else has any questions, let me know. It's almost 1 o'clock, so we're gonna wrap it up shortly. But I do want to touch a little bit more before we go on some of the other things you guys are doing over at CMU and the Buck. What are some of the other technologies that you guys are looking at?
You mean which specific? I mean, we as a university are platform agnostic. We are not taking a view of one platform versus another. I can say that individual researchers have looked at Bitcoin. I believe, actually, I don't remember whether or not they got that. You know, we have had groups apply for funding from the Ethereum Foundation, from the Tezos Foundation, from other foundations. I don't remember off the top of my head how any of those landed, so I don't want to comment. But you know, we have folks who have worked in Ethereum specifically and done extensive research on Ethereum. We have one person who has done pretty sure this was published publicly, but I don't want to shout his name out just in case. But we have one person in the CS department who has done formal verification of Hashgraph's algorithm, of Hedera Hashgraph's algorithm. So we do have folks, I don't want to say staking their own bets or anything like that. I just think that for a variety of reasons, people's interests gravitate towards certain areas. You know, again, we as a university are totally agnostic. We are not backing anyone. We are not node hosting. You know, we are not doing anything like that. So we are not formally getting involved in backing any platform versus another. But I do think that what I would hope to see more of in, say, the next 5 years is more researchers directly working with the ecosystems that they're interested in, and hopefully getting more data and research to help enhance those systems and ecosystems. But yeah, that is not necessarily formalized as of yet. If I'm not mistaken, all of the formal funded research that's happening at the university is platform agnostic. At most, two groups are developing their own programming languages, one from more best principle CS perspective, called Obsidian, and one called Nomos, which is more meant to give you, you know, as soon as you're compiling your smart contract, it's going to automatically tell you the gas intensivity of that. So, you know, we do have groups creating their own ideas out of the university, but yeah, we're to my knowledge, no one is officially setting the stake of like, we are backing this one horse in the 1,500 plus cryptocurrencies and blockchain platforms out there.
Okay, I'm glad you answered it that way. I think I was more looking towards like when I was looking at the website that you guys are also looking at like AI and stuff like that. I took a look at your podcast. I that's all stuff that's in my field and my realm as well. So I want to.
Yeah, I mean, beyond blockchain, yeah, I mean, you know, just working, again, half of my job is with Scilab, Security and Privacy Institute. We touch on anything that relates to security and privacy. So we look at AI security, AI machine learning related security, cyber security, network security, system security, hardware security. Another thing that I'm personally managing is I'm project managing an IoT initiative. We have Pico CTF, which is an awesome platform for anyone from middle school up to be able to have a gamified way of learning cybersecurity. And that's founded by the PPP, or initially, I believe, was created by the PPP team, the Plaid Parliament Opponent, which was the most winningest team at the DEF CON annual hackathon. You know, we have folks looking at, I mean, you know, autonomous vehicles and some of the research that started at CMU from the DARPA challenge back in 2007, that is linked to Scilab as well. We have folks doing biometrics and more visual stuff. We have folks doing, I'm definitely blanking on at least a few of the areas, but you know, we're touching on CMU being what it is in the technical space. If you've heard of a technology buzzword, probably someone on campus is doing some research around it. But yeah, I mean, just especially with the focus of the School of Computer Science and Engineering, you know, machine learning is a huge area for us.
Oh man, that's such a topic that we could go in and talk about for, I'm sure, a whole another hour. We're gonna have to schedule another day where I have you on for both a machine learning topic as well as one for security. I've been looking at a lot of different things that blockchain can incorporate with security in terms of AI, in terms of quantum computing, and in terms of IoT, like you just discussed. And for people that don't know any of those, could you touch upon, like what are those fields and why would people be interested in that?
So again, just one thing to make sure to be clear, all the ones that I mentioned are being looked at separate from the blockchain space. I don't know if we have that many researchers trying to link across these disciplines for a variety of technical reasons. In short, artificial intelligence, machine learning is the whole idea of, it started very much with a much more futuristic vision back in the 50s of, how can we get intelligent computing instead of literally just following and executing orders? How can we get systems to better understand and jump to their own conclusions? And I think with things like neural nets and deep learning, which are all just different specific ways that specific applications, you could say, or subsets of artificial intelligence. I think that we're seeing some very interesting embodiments where these are black boxes, and researchers have no clue how they're coming up with the outputs that they're coming up with. IoT is just Internet of Things. So the whole idea, if you've heard of a smart fridge, smart whatever, which by the way, if you've heard of a smart most things, that also means it's probably not that secure and you're adding more security vulnerabilities. But that's besides the point. IoT in general is more this idea of this interconnected landscape of connected devices. Thanks for joining, Alan. In terms of what were the other ones that we were saying? Cybersecurity is all about how do you actually secure your systems. If you've heard of platforms getting hacked or something like that, that's all the question of how do you make sure that you are creating the right defenses around it, which links to network security. If it's specifically going through the way that your computer or device is connected to other devices, if that is the specific point of weakness, that can be the focus there. Network security, again, is through that channel. Hardware security is, you can have weakness in your device that's exploited somehow. So yeah, I don't know if I missed any of the ones to briefly overview, but that's a very high level, overly simplified, and I'm sure anyone with a much better technical knowledge can pick those apart in a million different ways, but just a kind of rule of thumb of what those areas are.
Great way to summarize it. Definitely want to break it down in another talk. It was a pleasure having you on, Eugene. I can't wait to talk to you again. Thank you guys for joining us. This has been another crypto chat with the blockchain in the Berg. And Rebecca, want to say anything?
I just want to say thank you. You did touch on so many things, Eugene, that we'd love to hear more in the future. When we can all gather again, we'd love to have you as a guest if you'd be willing, and maybe do some things together. It would be a lot of fun to meet some new people and yeah, explore all that. And Jerome and Annalise and Tim, thank you, Bits and Tokens, for hosting us. We really appreciate it. And I hope everybody just has a great weekend. Stay safe.
Thanks for having me. Likewise.
Thanks to you all. This is it, guys. The future is here. You guys can join in virtual reality via the Zoom call on YouTube. I'm glad to have you on today, and thank you guys for joining us. It's been a great talk. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye.